The dissident right is a major faction within the broader political right, and their influence will determine the shape of the conservative movement over the next few decades. While they are a diverse group, they generally identify as Christian or Christian nationalist, and they adopt very restrictionist views on immigration and argue for populist and anti-establishment economic and foreign policies. From a mimetic point of view, the dissident right are on the verge of breaking out of the influencer stage of the meme adoption curve and into the normie stage. Major figures like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens are mining this new ideological territory to great effect, and this trend will only accelerate once Trump is no longer around to unify the conservative movement.
A consistent but almost never noted theme of American foreign policy is that it is always the Christians who suffer. When there's a war abroad that the United States is funding, it is Christians who tend to die disproportionately.
I'm a Christian first, okay? And so my concerns are going to be with what's happening to Christians all around the world, because it is us. We are the #1 most persecuted religion in the world. And all Christians watching this need to realize the time is now to start speaking up.
While many members and beliefs of the dissident right are self-evidently repulsive, it's vitally important to recognize and acknowledge the key truths that they have built their movement around. One of the fundamental ideas that the dissident right puts forward is that individuals derive meaning from being part of a collective, and that collective must be tied to a particular people group or ethnicity rather than an abstract set of ideas. Sam Hyde, a very mimetically significant figure within the dissident right, made this point among others in his viral address to Elon Musk.
There's this disturbing idea from the boomercon right that America is just a collection of ideas. You wanted these people on your side, they're ready to be on your side, but you have to fight not for Ben Shapiro's idea of the country of America, the notion of America as this collection of ideas. That's not what it is. It's Americans. That's who you have to fight for. If you're in America, doing business in America, you want to be the man in America, you have to fight for the American people. You're not fighting for a paragraph. You're not fighting for a set of ideas, man. It's the American people who need your help. That's fundamentally why I think people are pissed off here.
This idea is at direct odds with the alternative belief that most Americans have, including myself to some degree, that American identity is based on ideas and abstract principles rather than an ethnicity.
Lurking underneath all of this is that deeper question of what is American identity? And I think it's been said recently, and I think is provocative, and I think it's worth talking about, that America's not a creedal nation, that people will not die for a nation solely founded on abstract ideals. And I guess if that is your view, then that might inform your view of what immigration policy should look like. But my own view is actually, I do think that it's just a fact of history that the people who fought the American Revolution did fight for a nation founded on a set of ideals.
I believe that one of the most important political projects over the next few decades is being able to provide an answer to the question, what does it mean to be an American? Or what constitutes the American ethnicity? I'm not saying the dissident right are completely correct in their idea that identity is not related to abstract ideas and principles. But I do think we have to contend with certain points that people like Douglas Murray put forward about national identity and ethnicity. Think of this example. If an Irish couple moves to China and has children in Shanghai, no one would think of those children as being ethnically Chinese. And if a Chinese couple moved to Venezuela and had children in Caracas, no one would think of those children as being ethnically Venezuelan. So if we take, let's say, a Russian couple that doesn't speak any English and they move to the United States and raise children in Chicago, are those children ethnically American? Legally, they would have birthright citizenship, which I think we should end, but that's a separate issue. But culturally, are they American in the same sense as your average Black, Hispanic, Asian, white person that's been here 4 generations? I like to think yes, because we have this wonderful concept of assimilation, where immigrants willingly sacrifice their previous national loyalties to come here and become part of the broader American culture. I think it's a glorious social norm that when someone mentions that they're an immigrant, the entire room of people will clap and cheer and welcome them to God's true chosen country. But that's the thing, they're not just assimilating to legal agreements about free speech and gun ownership. American identity is more than just a set of declared propositions. It's a collection of narratives, myths, social norms, customs, all of the things that our deeply wired tribal psychology subsists on. The archetype of positive culture, which contains all of the psychologically compelling content related to family, friends, and home, is a very powerful emotional force, and the dissident right are very good at building their movement on this archetype. I do think American ethnicity is unique in that it's not directly based on race or a particular genetic lineage. But to simply say it's a set of propositions or ideals might make sense to people who define themselves by what ideas they hold, but for the vast majority of people, I think they define themselves by who they are in relation to their community, and I do think that is a much more tribal, collective, and ethnic view, although not necessarily, and I would say not at all, fundamentally racial or genetic. People have to participate in a shared social game that is deeper than just, for example, economic transactions. Many people who come to this country do so primarily for economic reasons. They aren't necessarily coming here with a particular strong desire to assimilate to American cultural norms and customs. And in areas where migrants can carve out entire communities for themselves and may not even have to speak English, there's no need for assimilation to begin with. I just talked to someone in Minnesota who said that when he went to the grocery store, he talked to 3 different people working there, and none of them spoke English. I think that's a problem, and the sad truth is, too many economic migrants that are not coming here with a desire to assimilate to some sort of American ethnicity poses a danger to the sort of collective stability of society. So while the freaks within the dissident right will perpetually make it difficult to sympathize with their underlying points, dismissing the dissident right out of hand is something only a misguided liberal atheist would do. Speaking of misguided liberal atheists, people like James Lindsay and Konstantin Kisin are hard at work strawmanning the dissident right by accusing people like Tucker Carlson of being woke.
The woke right, for which Carlson is the undisputed spiritual leader, is feeling its way to a logic of its own. It is far from being fully formed, but it goes something like this. You can't believe anything you're being told. Look how they lied to you about Trump. True. COVID. True. And Biden winning the 2020 election. False. What if they also lied to you about everything else? We don't claim to know the truth. We're just asking questions. But we know what the truth is not, whatever the elites are telling you. Look how triggered they are by us just asking questions. That's evidence of their bias and fragility. It proves we are right.
The attempt to discredit the dissident right by accusing them of just asking questions does absolutely nothing to diminish their influence. Of course, it is true, as with all political factions, that the dissident right contains its share of freaks, and they should be condemned as such. But claiming that the dissident right are woke because they acknowledge the undeniable legacy of corruption in U.S. institutions like the intelligence agencies or Big Pharma is incompetent. It's just as incompetent as claiming that the progressive left are woke because they acknowledge the undeniable problem that arises from the ridiculous and extreme wealth inequality brought upon by what the kids call late-stage capitalism.
The relationship between income inequality and male homicide is like 0.75. It just covers all of it, which is to say that everywhere that everyone's poor, there's no male homicide. And everywhere that everyone's rich, there's no male homicide. But places where there's poor people and rich people, the male homicide rate goes way the hell up. And so it's unbelievably powerful relationship. That's a useful thing to keep squirreled away in your imagination. Poverty does not cause crime. Relative poverty causes crime. That is a completely different thing.
From what I can tell, the real reason people use a term like woke right is because it's a cheap and, to be honest, intellectually cowardly way of dismissing right-wing criticism of Israel. Given that the dissident right advocates for non-interventionist American foreign policy, it's true that they do not shy away from criticizing Israel's influence over the United States. And herein lies one of the fundamental problems with the dissident right, and the reason I don't sympathize with that label. As of right now, the dissident right has not done a good enough job of expunging itself of its own socially repugnant mental crack whores like Nick Fuentes. It's an iron law of mimetic warfare that nothing impedes a given ideological faction's own interests more so than their own freaks. And if, for example, you believe, as I do, that Israel's influence over the United States is a serious problem, then you will quickly recognize that Nick Fuentes is less than useless in helping make that case. For example, the Groyper King regularly attacks Dave Smith solely for being Jewish, despite the fact that Dave Smith is one of the most epic and mimetically significant voices speaking out against Israel's influence over the United States. So until people like Nick Fuentes are made complete pariahs by more competent members of the dissident right, I have no interest in associating with it. However, unlike the misguided liberal atheists, I'm not going to pretend that everyone on the dissident right are as unserious as their own freaks. But even if the freakazoid problem were addressed, there remains a much deeper problem that will forever plague the dissident right, and that is their propensity to degenerate into religious absolutism. Christianity may be at the base of Western civilization. I definitely believe that, and I would say it therefore makes up an essential implicit aspect of American ethnicity. But the Christian fundamentalism that many on the dissident right subscribe to seems far too sure of itself for my tastes.
That's really not the claim that religious fundamentalists make. The claim they make is worse than that, because they claim that the Quran, say, or the Bible for that matter, is the literal word of God. But more than that, they claim that their understanding of that word is correct, which means they conflate two things. Like, because you could imagine a situation where you had a book, and I'm not saying this is the case, it's an imaginative exercise, where you had a book that had all the answers, that was extraordinarily complicated. And so that when you read it, it wouldn't be obvious that you understood it, or perhaps it wouldn't be obvious that you didn't understand it either, but you're not going to be able to, you can't get an uninterpreted version of the book. And so the fundamentalist claim is far worse. It's that not only is there an absolute reality, truth, embedded in the book, but that their particular take on that absolute reality is the absolute take on that book.
As the great meme war rages on, we'll keep an eye out on the dissident right. If you're interested in some of my written work, you can join my Substack. It's completely free and always will be. Until then, good luck and Godspeed.